morning.
Morning. All right. Well, good to see everyone. We're going to, Ian, maybe show up a quick video before we get started.
Coming right up.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. Good to see you guys all from all over the world. We have quite a crew on to talk about predictability of growth today. I'm Sherry Johnston with Winning by Design. And as you can see, we are a growth architecture firm focused on reoccurring revenue companies. And we are joined here today with one of the masterminds behind a lot of those growth models, Dr. Dan Patterson, who leads our work on the growth modeling and quantitative decision making. So excited to have him here today to show us some insights. We are going to do a little bit of math, really dive into the numbers today to just set expectations. So be prepared for a little bit of calculations here. What we really want to showcase is sort of what we see in the market where there is a lack of understanding of the predictability of growth models. We all have retirements that we're really calculating to understand, hey, what is our likelihood of being able to hit that number in a comfortable position? But why don't we do that with our growth targets? And what we want to do today is show you some modeling of not only how we do this in our growth guidance for various boards and go-to-market executive teams, and then also give you your own tools where you can do a basic calculation on your own with some of the back end of how our models work as well to help you understand your likelihood as we move into 2026 of hitting your growth targets. So Dan's going to walk through the principles of the growth targets and understanding the background, and then we'll actually get into some real calculations of a company that we have put together. So excited to dive in. Before we dive in, though, we would love to hear all from you. Great to see people from everywhere, from Bangalore, Montana, Berlin, Marcus. Great to have you. So what we'd love to hear from you guys is, are you seeing the same thing that we see in our customer base as an operator in a company? Oftentimes there was a number thrown out there and there was really no understanding of how we were going to get to that number, other than potentially hiring a couple new reps is the growth model. So I would love to pull up a poll here on understanding, we all have new 2026 growth targets that have been rolled out recently. What do you currently know the likelihood of hitting your growth targets that is within your organization? And see if it kind of maps what we're seeing in the market. All right, lots of calculations coming in. So yes, either yes, no, or mixed answers in the organization, which is also always a challenge. All right, well, let's pull up the results and see how we all did. All right, there's 16 of you no yes, so awesome. So if you fall into that camp, hopefully we'll give you some new insights into our calculations that may be helpful in validating. Majority of people know, and this is what we see often in the market of really lack of understanding of if those growth targets are what the path is to get there, how we're going to get there between growth, acquisition, expansion, and retention. and then mixed in the organization, which can be even a bigger problem if there is a lack of unification in where those models sit. So without further ado, Dan, I'm going to pass it off to you to get into the meat of it.
All right, amazing. Thank you, Sherry. Quick AV test, screen sharing behaving with the title slide.
Looks great.
Fantastic. And Ian loved the intro music. I think All Along the Watchtower was made famous by Jimi Hendrix, but actually written by the one and only Bob Dylan. So loved the music intro. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I am ever so excited to spend the next 50 minutes sharing with you all concepts pertaining to what we call growth guidance. And the subtitle of our session today is the math or maths, if you come from the UK, as I do, behind your growth target. And I think out of the gate, it's really important to understand this is not a one-dimensional challenge. When we think about growth targets, this isn't just about a monetary target. A growth target, in many ways, is really three-dimensional because eventually you're going to hit a growth number. But more importantly, what we're trying to achieve is achieving or hitting that growth number within a given time horizon. And not only that, marching to a cadence and a trajectory that gives us a sufficient confidence level. So the poll was really interesting where the majority of us today don't march to that outcome within the context of a confidence level. So I think one of the very powerful takeaways from today's session will be how we bring together those three dimensions of monetary revenue, certainty, and time horizon. So in terms of the agenda, we thought it would be useful just to spend a few minutes recapping or introducing or reintroducing some of the underlying principles that are baked into this concept of growth guidance. Once we've done that, then we'll spend the majority of our time walking through calculating our growth model. We're actually going to demonstrate this using our own in-house AI agent. We call this Helix, and think of Helix as your mathematical assistant that can help drive some of the calculations. And actually, at the end of the session, we're also going to share with you a series of AI prompts so that you will actually be able to walk away and follow the exact same steps that we're going to demonstrate today in your own AI tool of choice. So with all of that, let's start on our growth principles. So indisputably, growth is absolutely a process that adheres to science. And I think first and foremost, growth follows a specific trajectory, and that trajectory is known as an S-curve. Now, why does it follow an S-curve? The reason is very, very simple. Typically, in our early stages of growth, we are able to achieve what we call exponential growth. In other words, our growth rate increases month on month, year on year. We achieve that exponential growth. That's fantastic. The counter to that, though, is over time, things actually get more challenging. They become less efficient. And the reason for that, there's multiple reasons, but one of the primary driving reasons is as we start to saturate our total addressable market, there is a counterforce pushing against that exponential growth curve. So the net of that is we end up with an S curve. So with growth guidance, what we're trying to do is delay the pushing back on the right-hand side of that S curve and best utilize our ability to drive the exponential nature of our growth curve. Now, with all of that said, there are different mechanisms by which we can achieve exponential growth. One is, for example, brute force. We can just sell more, and if we're successful at that more, we will actually experience exponential growth. However, that is not very efficient. The most efficient means to exponential growth is through what we call compounding. And in extremely simple terms, compounding is leveraging the goodness we've already generated, and from that pool of goodness, generate even more goodness. So it's a self-perpetuating circle or cycle. And again, I know this is certainly not news to most of the audience, but there are three sources of revenue growth. So on the left-hand side of the bow tie, we have acquisition, that's building our initial snowball. And then on the right-hand side, we are trying to retain that existing user base. We're trying to minimize churn. And then from that, expand our snowball through what we call expansion. Now, without getting into the depths of the maths here, Shari, in very simple terms, I like to think of acquisition as additive, and then the right-hand side of the bow tie, where again we're expanding against our existing user base, that is what we call multiplicative. And so our best bet with regards to driving that growth is on the right-hand side. And against those three sources of revenue, this is all about threes, I guess, today, because there are three growth levers that we can apply to those three sources. We can do more, we can do better through things like conversion rate efficiency, or again, we can do smarter. And with the advent of AI, this is absolutely becoming the mainstream where we can now, again, leverage our existing user base. So, Sherry, I'm going to take a little breather there. That was a fairly sort of fast and furious walk through some of the concepts. But any comments or observations from the chat before we dive into our live demonstration?
Yeah, it was great background. If there's any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But I think that helps set the stage of how those levers can work together. That will feed into these calculations and give us a sense of how this works. Amit is asking, we need to think this from the first principles of the architectural approach. Oh, just a comment. Ed has a question: is your mathematical S-curve modeled as a sigmoid function?
Sorry, as a what type of function, Sherry?
Is it, maybe I'm saying it wrong, sigmoid? I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I can answer that in real time on this session. The underlying curve is a combination of early exponential growth, as we saw in the previous slide, and then over time it's pushing back, or it's being pushed back through the likes of TAM saturation. There are different forms of that S curve. The S curve is if you like, a generic type. I think each individual organization, depending on where they're at in their growth and the levers they're adjusting, the subtype of that curve could change. But let me look into that more after the session, and we can probably answer it later.
Yeah, sounds good. Last question, and I'll let you jump into the calculations of, is it fair to say, based on the model, that compounding growth comes from the expansion side of the bow tie?
So compounding is a mechanism for driving the right-hand side. So again, acquisition is the initial snowball. In a perfect world, we would have 100% retention, but we can't do anything greater than that 100% from a retention perspective. The only way we can increase growth at that point is either sell more from an acquisition perspective or expand on that existing user base. The compounding is arguably the most cost-effective means to achieve that. So again, you can achieve exponential growth without compounding. Is it cost-effective? Absolutely not. So we're striving for the compounding being the primary driver of that exponential growth.
Great,
And
thank you. Makes sense.
and talking of exponential growth, Sherry, I think we should introduce the case study here. So we're going to walk through a scenario where I believe the company in question that you're going to walk us through is called Signal Forge. Is that correct?
That's correct. So Signal Forge is a Series C company where they optimize physical infrastructure, things like manufacturing plants, energy grids, etc. But yeah, looking to understand the predictability of their growth model.
Okay, and I think the North Star is I think it's a 5-year horizon with a overarching 2x ARR growth by the end of 2030.
That's correct.
Okay, and again, napkin math, I think that would be year on year about 15, close to 15% year on year growth.
Exactly.
Okay, so the steps that I'd like us to walk through, five steps. So first of all, putting aside our current capability and projection today, let's first of all test the feasibility, because that seems like a fairly aggressive North Star. Once we understand the aggressiveness of that aspiration, then let's take a look at, well, based on our current projection, are we aligned? Do we have a high probability of achieving that aspiration? In the case where we don't, then let's pinpoint where we should place our bets, not just from a revenue source, acquisition, retention, expansion, but even looking at that from are there specific GTM motions within our organization we should focus on? Once we understand where to place our bets, let's then run through a scenario where we place our bets and look at the benefit. We'll call that our acceleration scenario. And then for that acceleration scenario, what is the impact on our GTM factory? What does that mean from a marketing perspective? What does it mean from a win rate perspective in sales? What does it mean from a CS perspective on the right-hand side? Likewise for expansion.
Yeah, I love that. So once we kind of model this out, being able to see, hey, are we getting there or not? And if not, what can we do about it to adjust? So that's great.
Exactly. And this really just graphically represents what we just talked through there in that, we have this aspirational trajectory. It's going to be heavily reliant upon compounding to drive that exponential nature of the curve. We will first of all then look at the delta between that and our projection, and then we can start to dig into pinpointing how to address. So we're going to jump into actually live demonstration mode now. I mentioned our in-house AI agent called Helix. So scenario one, let's build that aspirational trajectory, Shari. And again, think of this as it's working backwards. We're going to fix the model based on the North Star, the 2x revenue by 2030. And we're going to ask Helix to actually work backwards to today to calculate the most efficient cost efficiency and revenue from a timing perspective, the most efficient trajectory path. So let's jump into Helix. And Sherry, can you see Helix on the screen?
I can.
Fantastic. So remind me again your current ARR leading into 2026.
We are at 100 million.
Okay. So Helix is using this as a starting point. It knows the finish point, the North Star, because we're about to tell it now. So your 2x by 2030, we said translated to, was it 15% year on year?
That's right.
Okay. So now what it's asking is, what is your company's business as usual for annual gross churn? So we can articulate this either as churn, Shari, or the inverse from a retention perspective. So
15% we're currently at.
okay. And so what Helix is doing here is it's gleaning the data points that it needs, again, to start doing that goal seek and work backwards for the aspirational trajectory. And then at the other end of the spectrum, from an expansion perspective.
Yeah, we're at 10% expansion.
Okay. So again, just napkin maths there, Sherry. If we are retaining at 85 and expanding at 10, napkin math for NRR, I think would be close to sort of 94, 95%.
That's right. Nice calculations. We knew there was going to be some math involved, right?
All right.
No.
So what Helix has done, it's taken those inputs and it has calculated for us the trajectory, again, that is needed to hit that aspiration. So if we go back to a little bit of a deeper dive here. So out of the gate, this is an achievable or an arguably achievable North Star. However, it is highly aggressive. And the reason why it's so aggressive, Sherry, again, is less about the dollar amount, the dollar target, but more pertaining to the limited time horizon. Exponential curves, if they are driven by compounding, need time for the magic of compounding to kick in. And so in the absence of the freedom of that time horizon, the only other way we can achieve that growth is by selling more. And so that's what this aspirational curve is actually reflecting. It's putting huge pressure on an increase or a required increase with regards to acquisition. Yes, there is some limited compounding, but again, that NRR of I think 94% that we napkin math calculated is hurting the ability for that compounding to really come into its own. The other insight that Helix provided, the model is actually segmenting also by motion. And so of the three motions within this business, the risk is actually sitting largely on the shoulders of the low touch motion. And sort of hold that thought, because as we dig deeper into the model, we'll get into how we can shift some of that focus and share the responsibility across additional motions as well.
Great.
Okay, so we understand our aspiration is aggressive. We have a trajectory that we would need to follow to achieve that aspiration. Now let's look at, well, how does that compare to our current projection? And so what we're going to do now, we're going to jump back into the model. And Helix is now asking us, Sherry, tell us more about the current state of our business. So it's actually asking a precursory question here. It's clarifying how to do some of the maths with regards to how do we calculate expansion. So we're going to calculate expansion as a percentage of the retained base. This is just tuning into how we think of our world. Okay, what is the actual dollar amount of new acquisition we're adding per year? And is this number growing or has it plateaued?
Yeah, so our single forge is 15 million in new acquisition and growing at 4% per year.
Okay. And so that 4% is certainly less than the overarching 15% ARR year on year that the model was demanding from the aspiration. Okay, let's see what it's going to ask us now. Okay, it's got sufficient data points from us where it's now come back with our projection. So if we continue business as usual, we will traject along the red dotted line. And again, if we dig a little bit deeper, what is this telling us? Well, it's telling us, first of all, that by our North Star date, which is 2030, we will fall short of that $200 million goal by 63 million. In fact, we will land on 137. So that's from a dollar perspective and certainly a percentage perspective, that's a really big delta. Not only that, our demand in the very early years, in fact, in 2026, the demand that the aspirational model is putting on our organization, we will have a $5 million shortfall out of the gate in year one. So this isn't as if it's sort of a gradually get worse, Sherry. It's, oh my gosh, this is a stair-step leap we will have to make in 2026 to even have a fighting chance of hitting that ARR goal.
Yeah, this is super helpful though as an operations leader if you're in planning though, where I would digest this is it helps me understand, where to put resources and customer acquisition or retention costs on which part of the bow tie, and where to really focus my efforts.
Exactly. So right now, $63 million delta. Okay, I'm starting to get tuned into the fact that I have a huge responsibility and challenge with regards to acquisition. That's going to limit or prohibit our initial snowball growth efforts, as I call it. So we got to focus firstly there. But then again, we keep coming back to the NRR number of 93, 94%. Even if we were able to successfully grow the snowball in the early stages through additional acquisition growth, already the model is starting to reveal that we have inefficiency on the right-hand side of the bow tie as well. So taking that to the next level, or actually diving deeper to be more precise, we call this the 3 by 3 growth matrix. And this is such a powerful insight because what it's doing, Sherry, again, it's taking that $63 million shortfall that we saw in the previous slide with the two curves,
Mhm.
and it is drilling down into 2 dimensions. So first of all, if we look at growth source, we can see acquisition, retention, expansion. We can see that of that $63 million shortfall, $37 million of that is a result of inefficient retention. So just over 50% of our shortfall is being or is a result of retention. If we flip this and turn the matrix on its side, we can also look at this from a GTM motion perspective. And in this example, we can see that our low touch motion is responsible for about 34 million of that 63 million shortfall. So the net of that is if we take the intersection of the two, of the 34 million in low touch, 22 million is low touch retention. So now we can literally start to home in 2 dimensions across the bow tie and by motion as to where we should start to place our bets and, as we call it, adjust levers to drive our projection closer to the aspiration and drive it closer to the aspiration with a high confidence level.
Yeah, this even further helps me as a operator executive understand, where the shortfall is coming from, how I can course correct.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of course correction, so far we've focused on here's where you should fix the bad. This matrix also highlights where you can align yourself to the good. In other words, yes, there are risks we need to fix, but also are there opportunities? And in fact, the smaller the number in this matrix actually represents an area of opportunity. So in this case, the delta between where we need to be and where we are in the high touch motion is actually relatively small. It's 3 mil, 5 mil, 1 mil across acquisition, retention, expansion, respectively. This is a direct indicator that actually, if we're already performing almost to the aspirational plan here, why not further pursue this and treat this particular motion as an opportunity? So this is both a place your bets from a fix the bad stuff, but also a place your bets and align with positive risk in the form of opportunity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, I do want to bring one question from Sarah that I think is resonating with others as well. We see how did the model devise the different low touch acquisition and mid touch acquisition since that wasn't fed into the model?
Okay, so so Helix actually has a or had a motion segmentation. I think it was a Google spreadsheet that it was already aware of. So
Okay,
it
so
does
we're
have
kind of
not.
simplifying the demo, but that it
It,
did have that information in the model.
yes, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yep.
great. Perfect.
Um, so we're able to pinpoint by revenue source, by motion, by 2030, where our pinch points are, where we should place our bets. But because the model, Shari, it's time phased, it can literally calculate that matrix over time. So if we simplify the time scale into, say, short term, medium, long term, the matrix changes can actually then represent growth priority shift over time. And I'm so excited to share this because what this is now doing for us, it is telling us, if, for example, if we take our low touch motion here, in the short term, we need to grow the snowball, as we alluded to earlier. We need to grow acquisition. But then pivoting into medium term, once our snowball is of sufficient size, we actually need to pivot our attention and focus more towards retention. And so this concept of placing your bets is sound and valid, but we need to place our bets accordingly relative to different periods of time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just as you, back to my retirement analogy, adjust your focus as you get closer and definitely model out that time is your friend in this case.
Hmm. Time is your friend. Your focus pivots over time, and then walking down the page here, Shari, we've got our low touch, mid touch, or medium touch, high touch. It's really interesting as well because in our low touch motion, we're going to pivot from acquisition to retention, or we need to pivot from acquisition to retention. Conversely, though, when we look at mid touch, we need to start with expansion and then pivot to retention. So the shortfall, the short-term shortfall for mid-touch is not acquisition as it is in low touch, but it's actually expansion. And so each of our motions carry different signatures, different patterns, which then drives our required behavior over time by motion.
Yeah, I love this because, again, back to the operator level can really give the business units even more granular direction on where their focus needs to go.
Exactly. So we're at the point now where we've generated our aspirational trajectory. We know it's aggressive. We've calculated our business as usual, our current projection. We've determined where and when to place our bets from a fix the risk perspective and then a align and leverage opportunity perspective. So now, step three, to generate scenario three, Sherry, we're going to generate what we call an acceleration scenario that takes into account those proposed place your bets. So what we're going to do is, in order of priority, we're going to take the top three suggested lever adjustments and plug them into the model. So what we're trying to achieve here is we're trying to examine whether if indeed we apply these levers on the left-hand side, do those levers result in a material improvement in our trajectory line, which is represented with the blue line here in the middle. Now, historically, Sherry, we used to look at this in what I call a deterministic manner. So, for example, we could say, okay, we're simply going to use things like conversion rates along the bow tie. We're going to change our retention from 85. We're going to plug it at 90, and boom, we'd get a deterministic output as to the improvement. But we've evolved that such that today we run a simulation instead of a deterministic model. So we run a Monte Carlo simulation, which is just simply a series of iterations. We run tens of thousands of iterations, and in each iteration, yes, we account for the lever shift, but more importantly, and most importantly, the model doesn't just assume we can magically get from 85 to 90 in retention. The model doesn't magically assume we can go from 15 mil to 20 mil in new acquisition. The outcome of these levers, Sherry, themselves carry uncertainty. So we can model the probability or the uncertainty or the certainty of achieving these. That gets taken into account in the simulation. So this gives us a much more realistic view of the acceleration scenario rather than if we were just magically able to achieve this, and this, then we'd hit our answer. Well, that's not helpful because it's not taking into account the complexity, the cost, the time to impact of those lever adjustments.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I do love this as bringing it back to the human element with when all of us are given a growth target that we're really unclear how to achieve. Oftentimes we're really saddled with this view that we may be seen as not aggressive enough or not growing the business enough if we are questioning it. But I really feel like this gives us the frank dialogue on like what we really need to achieve to be able to get there versus sort of a opinion state or aggressive state, but really helps us back it up with numbers on where the organization needs to be in order to achieve these often lofty growth targets.
Yep. And it's interesting. We were recently working with a customer whereby, again, the model came back with the required lever adjustments. The team, though, very rightly pushed back and said, well, we think we can achieve maybe 50% of that suggested lever adjustment. Well, the model's able to account for that during the simulation. So talking of simulation, let's dive back into Helix and let's now start to build out our scenario 3, which is our accelerated scenario, accounting for the suggested levers that came from the 3x3, but also accounting for the team's perception, Sherry, as to whether or how much of those lever shifts they can achieve. So the model or Helix is starting off by asking us, what is our worst case churn rate?
Yeah, 15%.
Okay, so our current churn rate was 15%. So what the team is suggesting here is worst case scenario, they don't think things will get worse from a churn rate perspective.
Correct. I think worst case with all improvements the team is making, that keeping it flat would be the worst case.
Okay. And then again, conversely, the best case, what is the best case churn that they're predicting?
I believe with the changes Signal Forge is making, 10% is doable.
Okay. Okay. All right. So now flipping to expansion on the right-hand side of the bow tie. Actually, it's interesting here. Helix is actually asking me to speed up because previously it asked two separate questions for min max, and now it's saying, "Hey Dan, can you give me the two together?" So
He wants to
minimum.
do math faster.
Okay, so minimum expansion.
Minimum expansion 10% and then max 15.
Okay. All right, and now it's going back to it's interrogating us on the acquisition lever. If you remember, the aspirations putting huge pressure or demand on the need for a stair-step increase in acquisition. So same question now for acquisition, minimum, maximum range.
Yeah, minimum at 15 million and the maximum at 20. So again, kind of keeping it flat versus
Uh-huh.
a 15 million or 5 million
Yeah.
increment.
So from a acquisition, an expansion, and a retention perspective, Sherry, the team believe they can't do any worse than they're doing today, and that there is upside, but the upside doesn't necessarily magically match the required upside that the model was asking for at the beginning.
Correct.
Okay. And then this is more of a qualitative question, it looks like here. Which of these three levers do we feel the leadership team has the most control over in the next 12 months from a revenue source perspective?
The best control we have is definitely our churn. Our product is once in pretty reliable on predicting the churn once it's successfully in place.
Okay, so behind the scenes, just to explain why it's asking this, it's going to take into account the mathematical numbers that you fed in above here, but from a ability to execute those lever adjustments, it's going to put a little bit more positive emphasis on churn. Is the reason why it's asking us this.
Yeah, I love that it's taking in the contextual nature of where the strengths might be in the business as
Mhm.
well.
All right, so what it's doing now, Sherry, it's running a Monte Carlo simulation, and it's running, oh my gosh, it's not running, it ran 10,000 iterations. I can tell you before having the likes of this at our fingertips, running this algorithmically, either in spreadsheets or in commercial risk modeling tools, which I've spent the last 30 years working in, would literally take hours. And it's come back within, I think that was less than 10, 15 seconds. So the speed of it execution is so powerful. Um, so let's jump back, take a mental sort of screenshot of this, but let's dive back into here. And again, what is this showing us? So again, quick recap. The blue is our aspirational trajectory. The red is our business as usual projection. As a result of embracing those three levers, accounting for the fact that not all of those levers are 100% achievable. That was based on the team's input of achievability. The model now has come back, Sherry, with this middle section here, this green segment. The reason why we're not showing a single line here, by the way, is we're now switching from a deterministic single point world to a probabilistic, which is a big step forward because now it's accounting for ranges of uncertainty. The acceleration scenario is a lot closer to the aspirational scenario now. In fact, relative to our $200 million goal, at year 5, we can now hit 171. If you remember previously, it was our projection was at a lowly 138, I think. That nets to a shortfall of 29 million. Yeah, and previously our shortfall was 63. So we've halved the shortfall from our projection. We are halfway there to hitting our aspiration. And not only that, now we can look at this from okay, we've just said we're halfway there to our goal. Interesting, but how confident are we about that? Well, by looking at the range of outcomes, we can actually now hang confidence levels on these scenarios, Sherry. So this accelerated scenario not only gets us close to 50% to where we need to get to, we can be 75% confident or certain that if we march to that trajectory, we will hit that number. So for the first time now, we're not just talking about revenue from a dollar perspective, it's revenue from that dollar perspective within the 5-year horizon and with a confidence level of 75%. So
Love it.
that goes back to sort of our three-dimensional objective that we introduced right at the beginning.
Fantastic. Yeah, again, I think just this gives teams such a better data-driven conversation to have around the growth targets and various scenarios, and also helps move the conversation from what we see in the market to being so acquisition focused to being more leveled out and thinking about those other two growth levers in as important or more important than acquisition, depending on your stage.
Yep. And another insight that this what we call a risk histogram, which is essentially just the total range of outcomes from the 10,000 runs, looking at the range of outcomes is as important as the dollar amount as well, Sherry, because marching to say $168 million, would I rather march to a higher number but with a much broader range of outcomes? No, I would rather march to a realistic number, 75% certainty, that has a very tight range. And actually, this chart is indicative of that. The range between what we call, say, P75 and P25 is only $6 million. So not only can I be 75% certain of hitting $168 million here, I know that in most instances here, there's only going to be a wiggle, that's not a very technical phrase, but a range of $6 million. So that in itself is, again, such a powerful metric for me to make the decision, okay, should I march forward with this acceleration, or do I need to stretch goal and keep pushing?
And we had some questions, Dan, on that point of the P75 through P25. So that refers to the probability range of the model. Is that correct?
Yeah, so sorry, I should have explained this in a little bit more detail. So this histogram is showing all of the 10,000 outcomes. So each outcome carries a dollar amount. So the outcome, Shari, that landed on, say, 160, is my mouse reflecting on the screen share?
Yes.
So we can see here, for example, at the $160 million mark, we had, if this is 100 runs, this is approximately 25. So 25 of the 10,000 outcomes came back with an outcome of $160 million. Conversely, if we look at the most frequent, and again, I'm approximating the numbers here, probably 172 million, approximately 570 of the outcomes came back with that number. So the p-values, what we do is we rank order each outcome. So we have the p100, p0, and that tells us the range of outcomes, and we then inverse the p-value to get a certainty. Does that help?
Yep, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yep. I think of this as the this is the range. The previous slide is the confidence, and then the 3 by 3 it's the what is causing us to land on this number. So I think we're comfortable with the certainty level, fantastically comfortable with the range, but we did say we're still only at 168 million, so we're only about 50% towards that ARR number. And so as a stretch goal, let's try a second scenario. So we're going to now look at how we can grow smarter. And in this specific example, we're going to leverage or explore leveraging growth loops. So we introduced growth loop, Sherry, back in May, actually, at the Impact Summit in San Francisco. There are different flavors, if you like, of growth loops. So, in the overarching, a growth loop is leveraging goodness that we've already generated. So if we take, for example, a user growth loop, what we're demonstrating here is from within the pool of happy users within our customer base, if we can pinpoint some of those users to be advocates, those advocates in turn can actually augment our own lead gen activities on the left-hand side of the bow tie. So we're not pretending these users become bigger users through expansion. It's very different. What we're saying is these users, through advocacy, can bring additional leads, which turn into opportunities to the table. That augments our lead gen on the left-hand side, which then adds to our wins. And then we get this self-perpetuating circle or cycle. So there are different types of growth loops. I think for this particular example, Sherry, we'll focus on one. We'll focus on the user advocacy loop.
Great.
And again, we're going to use Helix for this. And it's funny, Sherry, I sort of have a love-hate with Helix at this point, because for the Impact Summit, I'm pretty sure I spent about a week doing algorithmic modeling in spreadsheets to demonstrate growth loops. It's not going to take a week during this session, so let's take a look. All right, so we're focusing on our retained customer base, and within that customer base, actually, first of all, what is our current customer count, Sherry?
We have 4,000 active customers at Signal Forge.
Okay. And then within that customer base, you are a multi-user, multi-tenant solution. What is the average number, or just ballpark average number of users per customer?
5. We have 5 seats per customer.
Okay. And then based on the analysis that your marketing team did, you had a percentage of sort of ICP advocates, if you like, within that user pool.
Yeah, we estimate about 1% are advocates.
Okay. So we've got a large multiplication going upwards from the 4,000 customers, 5 seats per customer, and then it's going to get diluted back down with that percentage. And then on average, how many opportunities do we think, again, based on your marketing analysis, do we think these advocates can bring to the table?
Yeah, based off our attribution, we believe it's about 2 per year.
Okay. And win rate for opportunities?
Win rate's pretty high given the 55%, given the growth loop.
Okay. And you bring up a really good point there, because historically, if you've already embraced growth loops, then very often your win rate from a opportunity attributed back to a growth loop could arguably be higher than an organic opportunity that came from extreme left of bow tie or top of funnel. All right. And now the model is asking upfront ARR per customer, and it's using this Sherry to, well, it's about to use this to calculate the hopefully the positive dollar impact on the model.
Yep, 10,000 is our ARR per customer.
All right. So it's calculating the impact of these advocacy loops. And there we have it. So let's take a little deeper dive. So let's start with the chart on the right-hand side. So again, red projection, blue aspiration. Our initial acceleration got us to the green Sherry. And now adding the benefit of those user advocacy loops to the model, we are actually very, very close now to that aspirational curve.
Getting
Um,
closer.
yeah, so what's happening here is we're generating about 400 additional opportunities. That translates to about $2.2 million of additional yearly acquisition. Remember, we had a pinch point on building the snowball. So this gets us significantly closer. What's really interesting, well, I shouldn't say really interesting. That's the good. The it's interesting that we are overachieving in the short term, and then we do start to tail off in years 4, 5 here. That's an immediate indicator that we probably should now continue to push the boundaries and try and uphold and drive that NRR again, because we're overachieving on building the snowball on the acquisition side. It's above the blue line. It is starting to drop. I think the big picture, this is very positive. Our revenue outcome is $185 million. That's about a $15 million, it's a $14 million benefit to the original acceleration scenario. It literally gets us now only about $15 million short of what was 45 minutes ago, a highly, highly aggressive, how the heck do we achieve it aspirational goal.
Very cool. All right. Well, yeah, lots of great comments here. I think everyone's also excited to hear how they can calculate it on their own.
All right, so before we get to how we calculate on our own, I want to take the liberty of I just want to share 3 key takeaways that I believe are so important. Number one, first and foremost, focus on certainty as much as revenue. Again, you'll hit your number at some point in time, but hitting it within a given time horizon with a given degree of confidence, that is the key to growth success. I think tied to that, doing that drill down in using the likes of the 3x3 Sherry, you've got to pinpoint true bottlenecks beyond just looking at we have a $67 million delta. That $67 million as an example, that's a result. It's not the pinpointing, it's not the root cause. So root cause, and then take that root cause and drive that or put that into the Monte Carlo simulation to give you the acceleration scenarios. And I think it's so interesting in the real world, in real life, in execution of projects or businesses from a growth perspective, we only get one shot of execution. However, with tools like this, with growth guidance, with the Monte Carlo simulation, now at our fingertips, we literally have unlimited number of opportunities to run these what ifs, to do exploration, to determine feasibility. With that power at our fingertips, we can now determine the best path so that when we get into execution, honestly, we just have to execute as per plan. It drives confidence.
That's fantastic. Well, this is great, Dan. I know that a lot of comments are, "Hey, this is awesome." Also, pretty heavy stuff. So, wanted to go through a couple of ways in which we can help support, and you guys can utilize this type of model on your own. One, Dan, I know you and your team do some great work hands-on from a project-based system called our growth guidance for customers when they're looking at helping align the team around a growth model. And then the other area is we do have our Growth Institute, which we have a lot of the members I see online as well here, which is fantastic. And this group also collaborates and has a community that we can help with modeling out this as well as other topics in growth. So you're welcome to join this as well. It includes the growth architecture course that goes into more detail on how to utilize these models and beyond, as well as some of our other revenue architecture models. So if you want to check that out, you can join here. But we also, the third option is a little DIY option that we will send out to everybody, which is the cheat sheet of how you can really build your growth guidance model on your own using some AI prompts. So Dan, maybe tell us a little bit about how can utilize this.
You bet. So this is a cheat sheet that you can actually apply to any AI tool of your choice. We use Gemini, but this is equally applicable to Claude, to ChatGPT, etc. And what this is in order to assess feasibility of aspiration, remember that was our initial North Star, you can feed in these three prompts. Your AI tool will then come back. It may ask you questions similar to the way Helix was asking for questions to understand context and order of magnitude. Feed these prompts into your AI tool. That will give you your aspirational model. You can even then prompt in section 2 here to generate a somewhat analogous version of the Winning by Design 3x3 growth matrix. And then thirdly and finally, if you want to then start doing exploratory acceleration scenarios, these are our suggested prompts for generating the scenario, analyzing the improvement, and then things like the stretch goal that we demonstrated using growth loops. So this is
Amazing.
sort of I like the way you called it a DIY, if you like. I will say this is a great first step, not to tout Helix, and I know we're up on time in 1 minute, but Helix has been trained with a lot of the winning by design principles, revenue architecture, growth architecture. So the depth of insight that we walk through, Sherry, with Helix, it's going to be deeper than some of these more entry-level prompts, but this will certainly be a great starting point for everybody.
Amazing. All right. Well, we just hit about time. This is fantastic. Thank you. I know we didn't get to everybody's questions, so apologize. We will try to follow up with as much as we can within the transcript. And look for the cheat sheet in your inbox along with the recording of this session. But thank you, Dr. Dan. This is incredible. Will help provide a lot of insights to executive teams.
Yep. Love the discussion and the walkthrough. So thank you all very much.
And we'll keep it operation. We'll keep